Welcome to Film Strip. These podcasts are spoiler-filled as we discuss the plots, characters, and themes of the films in review. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.
Welcome to Film Strip. I'm Jay.
I'm Lindsey.
I'm Ron.
I'm Carmelita.
And we're here to talk about Peeping Tom, starring Carl Boehm, Moira Shearer, Anna Massey, Martin Miller, Jack Watson, Nigel Davenport, and Maxine Audley. Written by Leo Marks, directed by Michael Powell, a movie that has, in recent years, undergone a re-evaluation, I think is the term that we use on Film X Twitter these days, but one that certainly is, if you're a horror fan, you probably heard of it or whatever. We'll get into all of that. But first off, welcome back to the show, Carmelita. What have you been up to lately?
Hey, Fred. Lots of podcasting. And at the time of this recording, it's summertime. So lots of hiding out in dark rooms, watching movies, trying to stay out of the heat.
Fair. Second, this was your suggestion. So what's your background with this movie?
So this was a watch in recent years. I didn't grow up with this movie, don't have a long history with this movie. But upon that first watch, I fell madly in love with Peeping Tom. This is now one of my favorite films of all time.
Wow.
I think it's amazing. So this opportunity to talk about it with the two of you is just like, it's a dream come true. So thank you for having me on and for agreeing to talk about this amazing film.
Oh, yeah. This one's definitely got a lot of entry points. And having, not that long ago, back in July, we recorded our Christmas in July show, and we did the remake of Black Christmas, which this movie is often lumped into the pile of as part of some of the proto slasher movies and things like that. So, Lindsey, what about you, though? You ever had any experience with the movie Peeping Tom before now?
No, this is the first time I've ever seen it. So thank you for suggesting it, Carmelita. That's what we do here at Film Strip. We make dreams come true. So we're living them right now.
14 years of dreams coming true.
I know. I'm really excited to talk about it and get all of your juicy insights into the movie.
I don't know what roundtable doc I heard it on first, but it was definitely something that was in the context of someone talking about Halloween, which is my favorite, slasher movie of all time. And, and I can listen to people talk about it for days and can talk about it for days too. But a lot of people said, like the Michael Myers point of view, that's one of the things that really sets that movie apart. But Bob Clark did it in Black Christmas, and Michael Powell did it in Peeping Tom, and this was before anybody had really re-evaluated it. It was like, it's kind of the forgotten movie because it came out the same year as Psycho, and it just got buried, by Psycho. And if you look at the box office stuff, like it didn't make a lot of money. It made a little bit of money, but not much. But it ruined Michael Powell's career for years. And it wasn't until Martin Scorsese years later said everybody needs to really take a look at that again, and gave it this whole sheen that people started to go back and look at it. But yeah, I'm curious to get into it with both of you because I watched it because I heard people talking about it, and I thought, okay, I'll give that a spin. And I remember thinking like, wow, this is really very much in the same vein as Psycho, and the whole time wondering, why did this not land the same way? And I thought, well, maybe it's the subject matter. But then I thought Psycho's pretty bawdy for its time. And, there's been other things that have gone on since then. I've had the pleasure of reviewing a lot of decades of films last year, and part of this year, Mike from Amateur Auteurs had me on doing like top films of each decade from like 1900 through the 2010s. And the trick was to pick something I hadn't seen. And we did like Double Indemnity and, some other things, and finally got around to Chinatown and all these movies that I had just put off forever, and I feel like this one lives in sort of the same place as some of those, but it is the one that nobody talks about. And that's, I don't know, it's fun to think about that, but it's been years since I revisited it. So watching it this time was almost like watching it for the first time again. And Carmelita, for you to say that it ranks that high for you, that means it's coming in with some real punch, like just in broad strokes. What about this, like, just really hits for you?
I love that this film has this whole meta aspect about filmmaking, which is always interesting to see in film.
Yeah.
How filmmakers will create a film that then communicates something to us as viewers about the filmmaking process, they've dedicated their lives to. I also love that Peeping Tom is so frank about the subject matter that you create this character in Mark Lewis that's both a protagonist and an antagonist.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the earliest examples I can think of having a sympathetic villain, putting this from his perspective and not just the POV of like watching him commit these crimes, but having us be sympathetic to him in some ways, understanding where he's coming from. I love that. I think that's great. And I think now more than ever is a great time to talk about this movie. There's a lot of talk in recent years about trauma in horror films, and a lot of talk about, everyone's making these horror movies about trauma. Can we stop with the movies about trauma? Horror movies have always dealt in trauma.
Yeah.
And Peeping Tom is one of the most it's out there on Front Street.
Mm-hmm.
That's the motivations for this character, that's the driver in this story. It was so ahead of its time. And the fact that it's this forgotten, unloved movie from this bygone era that didn't get the same kind of attention and acclaim as Psycho, that also endears it to me.
Oh, that's exactly right. The fact that it's, it got buried in the press of something that's, world renowned and much bigger. And, it had a freaking theme park right after it for a while at Universal Studios. They may still have that. I don't know. But yeah, you mentioned something in there, Carmelita, that I thought was really neat. And it's that they don't hide the psychology part of this. Like Psycho sort of puts that at the very end of the movie. It's almost a bookend to the thing when you got the doctor just spewing out all the stuff, and where Halloween, puts it front and center too, because Loomis is the, this big character, he's the Van Helsing, whatever. But it's just neat that Peeping Tom interweaves it as part of it. And I think you said something in the middle there that I thought was great. And it's that this is a movie that asks you to follow the antagonist and feel sorry for them. And it's not the first time we had a pathetic, lead that is doing bad things, but it also makes the audience complicit in the crimes. All right, Ron, well, it's time to hear from you. We've all talked about our backgrounds with Peeping Tom, but what about you? When was the first time you saw this?
The first time I saw this was for this podcast. I don't know how this escaped my view, but I'm super glad to be introduced to it because I had a great time. And also, I feel like it popped up on one of those like Bravo's 100 Scariest Movie Moments or something. I had a vague awareness of it as a thing I should have probably already seen and hadn't seen. So, it was new to me, and I have many thoughts.
See, Carmelita, you're just making all the dreams happen tonight. So,
this is one of my favorite things in podcasting is when you can have folks who have seen a film and then first time watchers come together and talk through a movie. I love this.
Yeah, I love this too, though, because even though I've seen it before, I'm not the expert on this at all. Not that I'm necessarily the expert ever, but I've usually seen something a lot. And it's neat to have somebody on who's seen something a lot more than I have and is the champion for it. This will be a fun discussion as we get into. But I think we should do a plot summary before we go any deeper, and then we can start diving into the film proper. So, Mark Lewis, a quiet man with a troubled past, works as a focus puller on a London film set. And if you don't know what that is, Ron will explain it soon. By night, he harbors a sinister secret. Mark is a voyeur and a murderer, driven to capture the raw terror of his victims on film in their last moments. He uses a specially adapted camera with a hidden blade to achieve this, filming their final moments as they realize their fate, or kind of like Halloween Resurrection, but we'll get back to that. Mark's obsession stems from a traumatic childhood under the control of a cold scientific father who subjected him to fear experiments. And by subjecting him, we mean fucking tortured him. These experiments warped Mark's perception and fueled his dark desires. He finds solace only in the artificial world of filmmaking, but craves a more visceral experience. Mark becomes fixated on capturing genuine fear. He targets unsuspecting women, using his charm to lure them into vulnerable positions. And as he murders them, the camera becomes an extension of him, a way to relive and record his twisted version of his childhood experiences. And he's stringing them all together in like a Nicolas Cage 8mm style snuff film, but without James Gandolfini or Joaquin Phoenix. The police begin to investigate the string of murders, and Mark remains a step ahead, his focus puller skills translating well to his life of crime. He's carefully constructed a world, starts to crumble, though, when he develops a connection with Helen, a young woman that lives below him in the flat that they all rent together. And intrigued by his cryptic mentions of a documentary project, Helen stumbles upon his secret film collection. Horrified by the truth, she confronts him. The situation escalates, forcing Mark to confront his own demons, and with the police closing in, he prepares his final act. He stages a confrontation with Helen, using his camera as a weapon, but in a shocking twist, he doesn't kill her. Instead, he impales himself on the hidden blade, capturing his own death throes on film, a final horrifying addition to his collection of fear. The film ends with the police arriving at the scene, finding Helen traumatized and Mark dead, his disturbing legacy preserved on celluloid as credits roll. And that's the straightforward way to kind of walk through the film. I think, that gives it all away. It's not unlike a lot of other seminal slasher films or horror films. The plot isn't that complicated. We talked about Psycho earlier, and that's not a very complicated plot. It's got some twists and turns, but most of them aren't that complicated. Halloween's not complicated. Black Christmas is not very complicated at all. And I think the simplicity for these kind of films is something that works for it. And Carmelita, you had mentioned before that people are talking about like, oh, all these horror movies these days are about trauma and stuff like that. And that's certainly come back. I also think the simple story is making a real comeback. And I trace a lot of that back to something like Sinister, which is a pretty straightforward, simple, caper kind of thing with a lot of good stuff in it. I will stand for that movie forever. But even up to something like Black Coat's Daughter or even recently Longlegs. Those aren't complicated. They're pretty, straight line. Now they're weird as hell, but I like the fact that we're coming back to that more simpler form of the genre.
No, I think you're onto something there. It's when you just kind of look at it on paper, when you look at a summary like you've just given us, yeah, pretty straightforward. But all of what's achieved visually with the score, with the performances, all of that is what then fleshes out and creates all this tension and the suspense and the fear. It's all there in how they flesh it out visually and like creating an atmosphere. And this movie has a great atmosphere. Vibes. I think this would qualify as a vibes movie. The approach to it.
Ron, you've followed shows, episodic television for years on Den of Geek, things like Walking Dead, Fear the Walking Dead, and all that kind of thing. And I want your perspective on this because those start out with very simple premises and then balloon along the way. And how, what's that like for you to sort of see that come and go? Because from the writer's perspective, you see this differently than maybe the three of us do.
Well, at a certain point, especially with episodic television, which is what I've basically been doing for years at this point, at a certain point, you can tell when the creative team behind the show was like, okay, we've exhausted this premise. We've got to figure out some new element to toss into it, whether it's adding a character, taking character away, changing the setting. There's always at a certain point where they're like, well, we've exhausted just about all we can. We've beaten this, we've not only ridden this horse to death, we've beaten this dead horse, and then we've turned said dead horse into glue, and then we use the glue to make like collages of the horse, the memory of the horse.
That is an excellent. That's an excellent example. Lindsey, because this movie, when it was made, it feels a lot like the way a play gets blocked out and stuff, because stages in those days kind of work that way. And as somebody who spent a lot more time on stage than anybody else here and has done a number of things, like how does that aesthetic play in something that, is now 60 years forward?
I honestly didn't even think about it. But that is a great point that you bring up. I think this is one of the things I learned about myself doing the scary movie bracket that we started doing last year on Tis the Podcast, is I really like this era of horror movie thriller, like 70s, 80s, like early 80s specifically is my jam. I like the pace at which it moves. Going even earlier than that, I was excited about because we didn't really approach any. I mean, I guess we had some, like Nosferatu was one of the films that we watched, but this was definitely more my speed. It was more, I don't know, a little more melodramatic. I found myself trying to make that leap between when the movie was written / made / filmed and now, because it opens on this, what is supposed to be a discreet camera hidden under his coat. And it's like, oh, yeah, we don't have those anymore. It's way easier to film someone in secret now if you need to or want to, not need to. Hopefully you don't ever need to. That'd be weird. But you know what I mean? But that was my first thought, was like, wow, real discreet, buddy. And then I was like, that's what they had. That's what he's working with. But I liked it. Honestly, I thought the performances in it were fantastic. Carl, sorry, what's his name? Carl Boehm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Carl Boehm, amazing. And everyone else in the film too, I thought just did great. I loved it.
Yeah, I will second with you on the performances here. And Carmelita, I'm going to toss it to you to talk about that a little more in depth here. But if anything works about this, it's everybody is giving a very earnest performance. Like Psycho, Anthony Perkins is doing some genius stuff, and Janet Leigh's just having a ball because she knows what's coming, and then you've got the rest of the cast, but some of them are kind of blocks of wood, or like the guy that plays Arbogast is a trip. I love Barton Balsam, but he is giving he's in a different movie than the rest of them. He's in like Maltese Falcon 3, or something. And it's neat though to see like the difference, but it's all in the art of subtlety. At least that's the way I read it. What about you?
No, I agree. Carl Boehm's performance as Mark, he's obviously someone who's a loner, a little off, a little awkward in social situations. And there's all these little subtle ways that you kind of see his nervousness. And then there'll be moments where his anxiety ramps up. Like when someone goes to grab his camera, anyone puts hands on his camera, suddenly you see his anxiety shoot up. And then he's able to kind of bring it back down. Or the shift when he goes to commit these crimes, the second murder that we see of Vivian, one of the stars of this movie he's working on, he's being himself. And then there's just this turn in his expression. And suddenly he's got this very chilling demeanor. Like you can see that it's about to happen. He's about to murder this woman. Like, it's just great. I love kind of how he shifts from being just kind of an odd guy to then being very vulnerable, breaking down, freaking out, his anxiety, to then being this stone cold serial killer. It's just incredible.
Ron, I called you out for it in the plot summary, but anybody can answer this. What the hell is a focus puller? Like I can Google, but somebody tell me on the short version what that means exactly.
Basically, it's a guy whose sole job it is to make sure the camera's in focus at all times. Because if the shot is too soft or is out of focus or whatever, then it's unusable. So basically, like if I'm standing, 5 feet away from the camera and Carmelita is 8 feet away from the camera and they need to move focus from my face to Carmelita's face, they have to manually adjust and I'm pantomiming turning a dial here. They have to manually adjust the lens focus distance to shift from me being in focus to Carmelita being in focus behind me. So even today, there's some dude whose job is literally to turn that dial. And you see him do some of this on the movie set where he's measuring things.
Mm-hmm.
What he's setting up is where he's going to have to pull the focus from, and he'll make a little mark on it. Usually make a little mark on the lens with a green pencil. So no, all right. So at 8 degrees, I'm here. At 12 degrees, I'm here. At 15 degrees, I'm here. And then I'm back to 8 degrees for the master shot.
Just hearing you explain that made it make so much more sense. And one thing I'll applaud the movie for, they don't give us any of that. You just have to watch him do it and just accept that that's his job and stuff. And it's wild to we still do that today. That blows my mind that it's not just all digitally, done, but it makes sense as to why you can't do that, because foreground and background, and you can't move stuff that quick. My phone can't shift, that quick either and stuff. But I like, though, that his job is something that's very precise. Like you mentioned, he's got to make right measurements. He's got to think about it. So what better if you want like a day job for a serial killer than to do something that's very precise, and he's always in front of the cops and, all of this stuff. Like, I don't know. I thought it was neat, but he's also someone who, because of what he does, just completely blends into the background. Like, very few people pay attention to him. Like, I don't know. But, yeah.
When the cops show up to the studio after the murder of Vivian, he's there in the studio filming the reactions of everyone. And it's like, who could get away with that? Being at the scene of the crime and filming the reactions of the people present at this crime scene. But he can, because he's the guy that's next to the camera. That's what he does. Mm-hmm. No one will notice.
And then didn't he offer the camera to the cops, like offered the film to them, and they were like, no, we're good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought that was so neat. It was so like, I want to help you out. I'm going to just I'll make myself so not obvious because I'm going to be so helpful. And you'll think, yeah, this guy's just a loon. I'm not going to pay attention to
But he kind of wanted to be caught, right? But
well, I don't know, did he? That's
plain sight. I don't know. Well, maybe part of him did and part of him didn't. We saw him pivot so quickly. Mm-hmm. So who knows?
I took it as
of him wanted it.
As he kind of got off on reliving it again by just being, that whole bit about you come back to the scene of your crime. And he's just like, oh, I'm just going to get a real charge by like almost giving you myself away. And then, oh no, I'm over here.
Yeah. I think over time he does start to unravel. Mm-hmm. And you see that a lot in stories about serial killers. He's getting riskier and riskier. I mean, offing one of the stars of the film he's working on, that's pretty risky. Mm-hmm. But then later, when he realizes that he hasn't got the shot he needs, he's trying to capture that perfect distillation, that ultimate fear on camera. And he didn't get it with her murder. And one of the guys on the set shows him the nudie pictures. Mm-hmm. And that gives him the idea, well, I'll just kill one of these nude models I've been working with. But it's like, he's the only one that goes into that building with that woman. Mm-hmm. He's being followed. Like you're going to get caught at that point. There's no way you're not.
Yeah, can we talk about like the whole sexual politics of this for 1960? There's some racy stuff. Like bold. At one point I thought, are we really going to do this? And they don't. But I thought, man, I really thought they were going to go there with this because I thought, man, I can imagine the pearl clutching that happened when people got laid eyes on this. And I can only lay that on the fact that this is an English production. And the Europeans have a different view of nudity than Americans do.
Well, it's funny you say that. This was the first nude scene in a feature-length film in Britain.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And they did clutch their pearls, Jay.
Yes.
Yes, true.
They pulled the movie out of theaters, in fact.
Yeah.
Well, I loved it.
For a lot of reasons, I'm sure, but...
Yeah.
We get the aspect of voyeurism through film and, the audience watching films, the filmmaker making films. with, subject matter that's tawdry or violent, but there's also the voyeurism within the film, everyday voyeurism.
Mm-hmm.
When the body of the sex worker that's killed during the opening is being carried out, the street is lined with looky-loos standing around to get a peek at the dead body. The older gentleman that comes into the newsstand to purchase pornography.
Yeah, and he has to hide it. Yeah.
He has to hide it. He doesn't want to be seen, but he buys the lot. He buys that whole booklet of pornographic photos. Helen later on wants to see the film that were made, that he was making, but he shows her his father's films, and she comments on, why would your father film you watching this couple make out in the park? And he offers to turn it off if it's upsetting to her. And she says, no, don't turn it off. She wants to see it.
Can I tell you where my mind went in that moment? Is in both versions of Thomas Harris's Red Dragon, when Francis Dollarhide takes his blind girlfriend to basically go like pet the tiger. And in both versions of that movie, she cups the tiger's balls. Like it's like a big, like, and then they go and they have sex afterward. Like it's a thing. It's like this whole thing. And I was like, oh, that's where you ripped that off from, because Thomas Harris ripped everything off. Like, oh, that's where you ripped that off from. Oh, I get it. But I like that he's like testing her too. Like, what are your limits? And again, think about 1960s mentality for her to go like, yeah, so, that was something that I can't imagine an audience just understood what to do with that,
Well, this is one of the things where I was trying to make the leap, right? Because this came out in 1960, so we're not in like free love era yet.
Or a few years. Yeah.
Yeah. And isn't Pamela Green, she was a porn star, if I'm not mistaken, or the equivalent of what a porn star was in the 1960s, like softcore. And it was, so I'm trying to draw all these lines for me. I was like, so that would be like if someone put Jenna Jameson in like H2O.
Yeah.
I mean, I think she was a big spectacle of it. And for me, she wasn't a huge character, but there was a lot of things written about it.
A better one. We talked to the three of us, Ron, Lindsey, we talked about Crybaby. They put Tracy Lords in that.
Yes. Oh yeah, that's right.
So it's the same idea.
Yeah.
Think about Rabid. Cronenberg puts Marilyn Chambers in Rabid.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. So it's been done since, but to think about it again in this context, it's different. It's just, I don't know, it plays very different. So
yeah, well, the things that people don't want to be seen doing or participating in, would never admit that they enjoy, but they want to watch.
Right.
And this movie is all about the things we want to watch that we're not supposed to want to watch, but we do.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at the Mark character too, and as his background gets unfurled, and you see the fucking torture his father puts him through so that he can like make academic journals off of him. I was like, man, that's just like a whole lot of Dr. Phil trauma going on right here. We got episode after episode of this, and you see it, but it also, you realize that at some point he equated all that fear conditioning, turned him into somebody who really, it took a lot to ever scare him. So it would take a lot to like heighten him to anything at that point. And it's in here, but it's also really subtle subtext, but it's pretty clear that like this guy has to go through some pretty strange links to, feel any kind of pleasure at all. And he's gone to that other place. And, again, I go to, more modern, or compared to this modern stuff, you think about Clive Barker and the whole ethos of Hellraiser is, this S&M beyond dreams, and be careful what you wish for, all that stuff. And what does it take for this guy to get going? And then you have, when, the Helen character gets in there, and her mother too, which we'll talk about in a little bit, because that's a performance. It disrupts that whole world. Again, I go back to the way Dollarhide's character turns in the middle of Red Dragon. It's when he meets the photographer, the blind, the film processor. He just is smitten. You know, he stops killing people for a while. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, the beast is savage, but you know, they're never fully savage, you know, along the way. Ron, can you think of any like more modern equivalencies that pull this off this well? Because I know this. I mean, this film gets little bits of it referenced in lots of stuff, and we've dropped some of it, but I don't know of one that's just as straight out about like the kid who goes through all the experiments and then turns into the absolute monster in the end.
Ooh. Splice wouldn't really count because it's not psychological experiments.
Yeah.
Funny enough, the closest thing I could think of is Silent Night, Deadly Night.
You know,
where the kid is the child is traumatized and then
that's not a bad call.
Grows up to become an adult who's nominally functional, except when he's specifically triggered by Santa Claus or, in this case, fear. It's interesting because I was the thing that this made me think the most of is, has anyone else here been a psychology major?
Yes, for one semester.
Did you ever learn about operant conditioning?
Yes, but don't ask me to repeat any of it to you. But yes.
Well, after you repeat it, no. Well, B.F. Skinner had this idea of operant conditioning, where basically he had this box that he would keep a lab animal in and would expose it to various stimuli to see how it reacted. And it made me think a lot of like, well, this is just like the evil version of B.F. Skinner, and B.F. Skinner was a big deal in like the 40s and 50s when this movie would have been in development, and it would have been part of that like zeitgeist. And it's interesting to think about, well, this is just, this was just like the evil version of, the Skinner box conditioning chamber.
You both have brought up something, and I just now thought of it, but this movie is unique in the fact that psychology is one of the characters, and modern psychology was such a part of becoming a part of our culture at the time. We were reading and talking about Freud in open ways, and everybody was talking, the theorists were out. And this was at a time when, I mean, that would be the kind of people that got invited on to Dick Cavett and stuff like that to talk about theirs. I mean, can you imagine now, like your psychology professors on Jimmy Fallon, like the joke that would be? But back then, that was the kind of people because people didn't have the internet, to get knowledge, right? So how do you get it to them? Through this great box that we all now have in our room, And so I don't know, it's neat to think about like that, and never put that together till you said it. So Linz, from the supporting characters' point of view here and stuff, what do you make of the assortment of women that are run in and out of Mark's life that he pulls into his web and lets go of?
Well, it's so interesting. So the first one that raised my eyebrow was when he was originally taking the photographs in the, I don't know what we call it, like the smut house, or
look like a parlor kind of stuff.
Yeah. And there was the woman with the lip issue, or it wasn't quite a cleft lip, but I think that's what it was supposed to be. And he was so entranced, and I was like, oh, she's going to be the love interest. And then it took a hard left turn. I don't know. I mean, they were all like disposable and not at the same time. It was really a weird dichotomy. When he killed the stand-in actress, that's when my first thought was, oh, okay, cool. So no one's safe. Got it. And then he just seems to fall really in love with, is it Helen? That's her name. And it was so sweet. And usually like love stories and thrillers, or the equivalent of that in a thriller or in a horror movie, they don't usually work for me because I feel like it doesn't do a whole lot for the plot or the character development a lot of the time. But this one really was so well done, and it worked so well, and it was so sweet. And I really it really humanized Mark. And the fact that Helen was also kind of like, yeah, I mean, okay, cool. You kill people. It's fine. We'll get through it. Let's work on this. You don't have to kill yourself. We can make something work. And it was just, they were all so different and so interesting, and somehow like the character development in the brief period of time that they had really worked.
You remember we talked about in the Black Christmas 2006 that they were pretty much all the same except Katie Cassidy, who was blonde.
Yeah.
They were just all the same version of some brunette, get killed. And some of them were, on the left side of smartass versus the right side, but they were all pretty much the same, disposable thing in this. And the fact that all of these they're all different archetypes of things. And especially like Mrs. Stevens, the blonde mom,
Yes.
like the fact that he could induce fear out of her and she doesn't see it coming. Like that puts the audience in a weird spot. Like I felt like, oh, this is really exciting, but also like this is fucking crazy too, man. Like and I have to give the credit too to the score here of Brian Eastdale, who scored a lot of films for decades and stuff. The music in this really, I mean, like most good thriller movies, if the score is not any good, it would just be a bunch of people talking. The score drives this so much, but particularly in the Mrs. Stevens scenes, I really dug the way that all worked.
Jay, you asked me earlier for a modern comparison to this movie, and I just remembered the name of another movie that I was thinking about. Strange Days.
Oh yes, yeah.
The whole plot of Strange Days is basically if you shot Peeping Tom from the police detective point of view, where they're trying to hunt the guy down who's doing the voyeuristic murder videos or brain scans or whatever it is in Strange Days. I forget the plot MacGuffin that allowed them to experience other people's deaths, and that's a pretty interesting idea for James Cameron to come back to at that particular point in his life.
Yeah. Well, you could even say like the Minority Report that Spielberg made with Cruise is a little bit of that. The Philip K. Dick was doing some other stuff with that story, but a lot of it is being put into that place and seeing it from that point of view, I just think it's neat though, again, because it's such a bold thing that Michael Powell is doing. But every time he goes to kill somebody, we get behind that camera. We get to see the blade come out and all of that stuff. And it had never hit me before. I mean, I thought I had seen tripods used as weapons because I've seen all the Jason movies, because I'm sure he did it at some point. Maybe. I don't know. But yeah, thank you. I thought so. I don't know which part, but I know specifically Halloween Resurrection does it. And it's like a whole, like Rick Rosenthal is like getting off on doing that. And I was like, hold on a minute, Google, clackety, clackety, clack. And I was like, sure enough, he's like, yeah, I figured since I was doing this, I knew what I was making, I'd at least have a little fun. And so he tried to do Peeping Tom for 5 minutes. So like, well, good on you, Rick, for having a good time at a paycheck gig like that. So that'll be the only time I can compare Halloween Resurrection in any way to Peeping Tom. Because there's a severe lack of kung fu in Peeping Tom, as we know.
Oh, they were both shot in color. I mean,
they were.
That's something.
Yeah, that is a thing though to think about, because famously Hitchcock did Psycho to keep it cheaper in black and white, and he figured if he was going to show blood, they'd never let him do it. And so he went with his TV crew. To do that. But in this one, it's all there to see. The other thing too, and I remember Scorsese talking about this too. He said, this was back in an era when you could frighten people by what they thought they saw, versus what you actually saw. And I was like, well, that's pretty sharp, because we don't get a lot of straight violence. It's right up to the moment of.
Even worse, like scariest for me was when he played the sound of himself as a child being tortured, and you have no idea what is happening to this little boy. So now your mind has to go to like these deep, dark places it doesn't have to, but mine did. And, trying to figure out like what he did. We saw the lizard, but it definitely got worse than that.
Oh yeah.
And as someone who's had like night terrors about things crawling on me in the dark, that would be a nightmare for me, to wake up and there be an actual factual lizard there crawling on me.
Yeah, no, fun fact, I was cleaning out our shed once. This is years ago when Rachel and I first got married, and one dropped on my head and I lost my shit and ran out of there. And she was like, what is wrong with you? I said, I got bitten by one of those as a Boy Scout and I never got over it. And so, so I had that
Really?
trauma. Yeah. I mean, it just
I
nipped
didn't know
me.
lizards bit.
It just nipped me. I mean, it was just
Oh,
probably going like, get away, but I was 11 or
a
whatever. So
child,
yeah,
yeah.
trauma, and no, that never cleared. And I don't do the reptiles. Like, no, me and Indiana Jones. No.
Well, you know what's fun that really pissed off the film establishment when this came out? Those home videos of Mark and his father, those torture videos, that's the director Michael Powell and his son.
Yeah,
Oh, God.
I read that.
Wow.
Why were people so upset about that? Because I read that
People
too, but I
were
didn't
very
understand.
upset. They were very upset that he would enact these scenes with his son for the film. They were, I mean, people did not like that at all.
No.
And
can you
maybe
imagine?
maybe it was a little too meta, like
Mhm. Well,
Yeah, that's fair.
true.
maybe they thought there was something I don't know. But that ruffled feathers. People did not like that.
Come, young man. It's time to chop up this prostitute with your old father.
That feels like one of those things that the Dylan Baker character is doing in Trick or Treat. Spoiler warning. I mean, really, right? It's sort of that, and
Yes.
yeah, we've seen that played out in other ways, but God, yeah, I can imagine just people losing their stuff over that. That's hilarious. So, I don't know the way this movie plots along too, though. That's the other thing about it. I mean, it's a little over an hour and 40 minutes long. This is back when the runtime was actually the runtime. Like, there were no 45 minutes of credits at the end of it. So you got all of it. And I never felt the length of it because I felt like they paced the kills out in the right amount of time. They worked the love story in and out right. And that's a hard thing to do, right? Like Carmelita, like a lot of these thriller movies, at some point they have a lull and they just drop and then they have to come back for the big ending. And this one never really lets you off the edge of your seat.
No, yeah, we have his escalation of violence.
Mm-hmm.
And through that, we're learning more and more about him. And then this progression in his relationship with Helen. And it's all woven together perfectly. And it's like what he's experiencing and connecting with Helen, juxtaposed with how he's unraveling in this murder snuff film project he's working on. It's like it those different aspects of his life, like, it's all going to collide in the end. And those all these different things that are happening internally with him and then in his life, trying to dodge the cops, trying to make this film, connecting with Helen. It's like it's all moving you towards that final sequence.
Lindsey, you mentioned before that it was neat to kind of watch Helen almost enable along the way. We're like, no, that's okay. I'll go along. Like, do you ever think like in somewhere in Mark's head, he was going like, maybe I can turn her over to the dark side and have an accomplice along the way? Like,
I don't know, because he was so at the end anyway, when the cops were there and he knew he'd been found out and then she knew at that point and she was trying to talk him out of it. It didn't seem like there was much of a hesitation for him. He was just like, nope, this is what I got to do. This was my plan the whole time.
mm-hmm.
And this is what we're doing. Very methodical and scientific, if you will.
Yeah.
But I mean, I like to think that there was a little part of him that, entertained the idea, but he didn't play it like that, I don't think.
What about the pieces where he's sort of asking, like, I have a friend who has this problem, and they get him to the psychologist or the psychiatrist on the phone, and they talk about, oh, he's a peeping Tom, he's a voyeur, and they, like they talk about this, all the psychology at the time about that. I mean, if anything dates the movie, it's that. It's the same thing with like Psycho at the end of that. It's like, well, that's a horribly dated set of concepts there. But at the time, that's what we knew, that's where we were.
Yeah. I think at that moment, she had inspired him early on to like, maybe I can change. Maybe I can do something different with my life. But so I guess I didn't really think back that far, but by the end of it, he was just like, "No, we're doing this. I'm killing myself."
Well, I think that's how he'd planned the end of his movie in his head, so he had to go with it. Like he already had the shots marked up in the grease pencil on the lens, and he knew which one was the final crank and how to turn it to the last to get the climax that he was looking for. And I think that was the only way that could have ended in a way that he would have been happy with. It just seemed like he knew that was how it was going to go, regardless of the complication of having a relationship and falling for someone else, which is why, like, at the very end, she's like trying to physically stop him. He just like gives her the Depot special and just knocks her flat down so he can impale himself.
Yeah, you're right. What about the POV shots specifically and stuff like that? When they do those things, I was really impressed with the level of production. For again, the money wasn't made with a lot of money on this movie, so like they were on a shoestring even for those days. It was like $150,000. It's really not a lot. They got a lot out of that, and I was impressed with just the level of production that got put into it.
No, it's beautiful. I that opening sequence, the first kill that we see, I love, love, love. As the camera's moving and those grid lines that are on the lens that looks like the crosshairs of a rifle scope.
Yeah.
Like she's in the crosshairs.
Mm-hmm.
And I love how, when he flips the light on to illuminate her before he goes in for the kill, and just watching her reactions, and the color is beautiful. The lighting is beautiful. And there's still at that point a lot left to our imagination. And I love how as the film progresses and we see more of his POV through the camera, which, will get done again many times. I think it's really special the way it's done here, because so much of this character's psychology is about how he's so removed and he has to live behind the camera. And he can't until Helen connect with people in a direct way. He has to do everything from behind the camera. And the women that he's murdering are subjects in the frame. They're not people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's gorgeously done. And it really puts you like in that headspace. Like, no, you mentioned this earlier. I'm complicit in this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as the audience, we are, because if we're going to follow him, we're asked to be a part of that thing, which is, I mean, again, that's something that a lot of slashers did, was to put you in that space. So you're behind the mask. What's that like, and how does that feel? And some of them are doing it for laughs and cheap thrills, and some are doing it more for like, imagine, putting yourself behind the glass and stuff. And I mean, I think that's one of the things, like the Silence of the Lambs, you did such a neat job of, was you put Clarice 3 feet from the devil, basically, and the only thing separating them is a piece of plexiglass, and just to watch how they react to each other. What would you do if you were sitting in front of that? Longlegs did that too, recently, with Micah Monroe sitting in front of fucking Nicolas Cage, and they're just doing not caginess, not your usual Cage off the wall, but like that performance, y'all, is a thing. Like, if you haven't seen it, you need to see it, because it is, he's making choices that I don't know if they were on the page or not, but wow.
I just saw an interview he did, and I'm sorry that I'm blanking on which publication it was for, but on their YouTube channel, and talked about he was channeling his mother. His mother was his inspiration for the performance of Longlegs.
That's wild to think about.
But I mean, that kind of ties into this, right? Like, everything that Mark is doing, it all comes back to his father.
Yeah. And the fact that he had to like sit with his mother on her deathbed and all that. It all does tie back around to it. I mean, that's ultimately how they figure it out too, right? Like the cops get on the trail and they do it. And if there's anything I'll ding the movie for, it is that the cops are portrayed to be mostly worthless and stupid, which most cops aren't. Like they actually are pretty good at their jobs. These are just sort of, I don't know. This bunch looks like they're more likely to sit in the back and smoke a cigar and drink a thing of brandy and talk about, you see the Cavalier game, Carruthers? You know, so.
Maybe that is a British sentiment, Jay, because think about Sherlock Holmes. All the cops in Sherlock Holmes are generally considered useless.
That is true. That is a very true statement. I hadn't thought of it in that
That's the first one that comes to mind. But there are there's other British programming that portrays cops in that way.
This is true.
Pretty much both of the Dr. Phibes movies, the cops are basically incompetent while Vincent Price is around being a super genius murder man.
Right. I don't know. I grew up watching reruns of David Suchet doing Hercule Poirot, you know. So I mean, I have seen, you know, Brana do it more recently, which those movies are fun, by the way. Like that was, you know, what I thought like a detective was, you know, and all that stuff. But you know, besides being the crazy things that like Mel Gibson was and stuff like that, you know, all the different stuff there. But when we get to the finale, though, you know, I mean, a horror film always has to hinge on the ending. Like it's got to give you something, right? It's either got to leave you with a big hook, big twist, you know, or it's got to be ultimately satisfying. So how did the finale play for y'all?
I mean, obviously I'm going to gush about it, right? I think it's great. I love that we're back in that dark room in his little workshop. And there's this dripping. I love the sound design. There's this dripping that's happening as the scene is building. And when Helen watches the film all the way through and now knows the truth. And then when he demonstrates for her, and I love the line where she says that it's something like I think it's maybe I wrote it down here somewhere. Oh, that the most frightening thing is fear. Wants to see the film to the end. Then he shows her, we finally see the mirror that he uses to show them their death, and like this distorted Helen's face, all distorted, and the building, and the cops show up like, oh God, okay, what now? And Ron mentioned when he sets up that final shot and all those flash bulbs are going off and the child screaming noises in the background. And it's all this crescendo of disturbing elements for his like final masterpiece scene. And then to have that last moment, like his last words, him saying that he's afraid and he's glad. That last moment of vulnerability in this like crazy scene, it's like it for me, it just ties everything together in this one moment.
Carmelita, you talk about that crescendo of things, and my frame of reference for that is Fred Walton's end of his first act of When a Stranger Calls. When she gets the call going, it's inside the house, get out the house, and you got that clock going and the music and the door creaking and screaming and all that, just everything on top of itself. To just scream in Charles Durning's face at the end. I mean, but it builds in that same way. And I'm sitting there going like, I bet you Walton is like pulling from this because it's his kind of flick. And I'm like, I could buy that because it plays the same way.
Yeah, I could see that.
I loved it. It was kind of like a fireworks finale, you know, where they're giving you everything they've got. And I want to give a shout out because Carmelita already mentioned the sound design, the light design at the end. Like I'm such a sucker for a good, like dark room, eyes only, lit up situation. It was just so good. I loved how they executed all of it. And I did not see the mirror coming, honestly. That was a surprise to me. So I thought that was a nice touch. And he had his moment. Mark had a moment to die. You know what I mean? Like he didn't just
Mm-hmm.
stab himself in the neck and leave it there, which is kind of what I was expecting. He, you know, it was a quick stab, and then he got to make a little bit of a meal out of it, which was nice.
That eye close up thing, that's like James Whale, Frankenstein, all of that. That's
Yeah.
like that
I
doctor
love
Yep.
it.
on the
Yeah.
doctor's eyes. It's the same. The same. It popped right in my head when I saw that. I was like, oh yeah, but that
I
was
love it.
awesome. But yeah, I love that too because it's so. I mean, again, your eye. You know, we talk about a lot of times actors do so much with their eyes. Nicolas Cage does a lot with his eyes. You know, and Carl Boehm here is giving you so much with that at the same time. And I mean, and, you know, to her credit too, so's Maura Shearer. I mean, she and Anna Massey, they both give you a lot in their
Yes.
close-ups right when you think they're going to die. You know, all the those two women in particular here.
Yeah, I can't really add too much to what everybody said. This was just an absolutely fabulous ending, and it was so well done, and it's such a unsettling cacophony of flashes, and he's running through the scene, and the background is you get the clatter of the film moving through the cameras as he plays back those tapes that as he plays back the thing we don't see, and it's just these big flashes of light just booming out of frame, and it's those old fashioned flash bulbs that have the pop too. So it's an
I
extra
love
layer
that.
of like chaotic sound, and then boom, the knife goes in, and he's having his death moment. It's just man, it's so well done. It reminded me of something that probably took from this movie is the end of Maniac, when
Yeah.
all of the mannequin or the I want to say Elijah Wood, it might be Tobey Maguire. One of those two guys did the 2011 Maniac,
Yeah, I think it was Elijah Wood did
where
that
all the
one.
shots, where it's just him talking and the hands are all you see pretty much for most of the movie, and then all the mannequins come to life and kill him at the end.
Yeah.
It gave me kind of that he was killed by the compulsion that he couldn't resist. So at the last minute of his life, he decided he's just going to lean into it and make this like his big final moment.
Yeah.
Is that a good thing though that he takes himself out, that he realizes that the ultimate face of fear is his own rather than the cops doing it and something like that? I kind of think it is. I think it's an interesting circle to come around.
Well, I think it's pretty well established in the movie that he has absolutely no fear of the cops. The way he just walks right into the investigation room and hands them the camera with the incriminating footage on it.
Yeah.
I think he's not afraid of those guys because I don't think there's anything really that he's afraid of except for human interaction.
Yeah.
And to find a new thing of fear after having had his fear basically programmed out of him through his father's experiments was like a last little, oh, I guess I'm human after all.
Yeah.
Moment.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always been about his fear. The fear he experienced as a child, and then that he wasn't able to experience after that. And to come back around to that, it's very cool.
It's
Poetic.
It's a neat concept to explore too. Like just the idea of what really is your fear and having to face your fear. I mean, that's as old as the hills, right? In terms of concept. But I mean, you think of all kinds of movies where that happens to our lead character, good or bad, right? Like, I mean, hell, Chief Brody has to go through his worst fear, which is being in the ocean in Jaws. And he's right there in the middle of that, you know, in the end of that, right? And
yeah,
you know, I mean, it's the same kind of idea, this sort of gestalt therapy way of throwing you into your fear, you know, and making you face it whether you want to or not, and yelling at you about it the whole time. I don't know. It's wild. I mean, we've talked about all the different, you know, kind of movies and things that this reminds us of and stuff. That clearly the influence was there, but I'll ask all of you, you know, again, why didn't this land with audiences the same way Psycho did, you think, considering the subject matter is so similar?
I think part of it was, I think a big issue with this movie was that it was shot in color rather than black and white. and I think it just made things feel a little more lurid and a little more. And this may be just me judging it through modern eyes, maybe a little bit sleazier because you get, flesh tones and the garish outfits that the girls were wearing, and the combination of open sex and open violence at the same time. Where in Psycho, there's not a huge sexual component involving Norman Bates isn't making peep shows on the side like this guy. Now in the Gus Van Sant version, we go into much more detail about that, but
yeah.
I think part of the problem was it was just not as audience friendly.
Mm.
And Michael Powell, who had been a bigger deal previously when he was with the Arches, with Pressburger, he was on the downslope of his career, and Hitchcock was on the ascendant.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that might have also had a little something to do with it. And the fact that this is a British movie and the British press just jumped all over it, talking about how it was,
vulgar. And
yeah, let's see, what are the quotes? The reviewer from Tribune magazine, Derek Hill, said the only really satisfactory way to dispose of Peeping Tom would be to shovel it up and flush it swiftly down the nearest sewer.
Wow.
Oh yeah, they're vicious.
Yeah, somebody compared it to leper colonies and the gutters of Calcutta.
Gracious.
And let's see. Somebody said said Michael Powell was like the Marquis de Sade.
I don't recommend Infinity Pool to any of those people, by the way, just so we know.
Well, I'm sure those people are long since dead.
I'm sure, but I'm just in my head going like, I'd love to like strap them in front of that for 20 minutes, right?
Yeah, they probably saw Shivers and exploded.
Well, another day on Donnie.
Like all those memes about what would happen if you took a Victorian and gave him like curry and he would explode.
Yeah,
that kind of deal.
Very Scanner style, yeah. I mean, again, that you see threads of this in everything, but you hit on something there that particularly the sexual part mixed with violence is all subtext in Psycho, where here it's the fucking text. Like it's right there and they're not going to back off of it. And in a lot of ways, I applaud the movie for going there. And the way it plays it off, the sex workers and the women that are taking the nudie photos or, boudoir photos or whatever, that's not played off. He's not like repulsed by any of it. He's not treating them any worse. He plays it as just like part of life and society. And to your point, Ron, this is a very English film that America just, a roadside hotel in a small town. Yeah, I know all of those. That, I don't know about that. I don't do that. Martha, gather the children. We're going to prayer meeting. That's what people would say when you told them that.
I agree with everything that we've already said. Like, just concrete. The reason why it probably didn't do as well was a combination of everything so far. But from a more ethereal standpoint, I think Peeping Tom deep down is way more relatable than Psycho. Like no one's keeping their dead mom in a chair or like pretending to be, dressing up like their dead mom. And like that's a little too wackadoo, but like there are Peeping Toms everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And there are I don't know, there are sex workers everywhere. And people like to look at that kind of stuff, but they don't want to like to look at it because it's frowned upon. And I think the fact that this movie is just bringing it out and saying like, yeah, this is actually like totally normal. And, this isn't, I mean, it's weird, but it's, this is just how it is. And people were, especially with the guy coming in and just like, buying a whole book of nudie pics and, laughing about it and then walking off with the educational books.
Yeah, I love how the shopkeep is like, let me give you one of these Life magazines.
Right? Like people are being called out in this movie for doing things they already do. And I think that there was definitely a sense of discomfort in that because all of that could actually happen in real life.
Well, and still happens. I mean, anytime you go on a website to purchase adult products of a sexual nature, what's the first thing it advertises? Discreet shipping.
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
Yeah,
we're still doing this. You know, people don't want to be caught.
I mean, I just watched this Elizabeth Gillis movie on Tubi called Spread about this down on her luck journalist who takes a temp job at a, basically going out of business, version of Playboy or something like that, and turns it around by building like a social media account for him, but hiding it as if it was like, some other thing that nobody would care about on your phone, and she does it all from we should make porn for women and this is how you do it. And you make it look like a boring app the kids won't want to play with. And I was like, I mean, there's some business to that, but I think about like the way that movie presents today. And she says, and there's so many times, like, we're not talking about anything nobody else talks about. Like her target audience is a bunch, like she gets a bunch of like the local housewives that live around her together to go, all right, tell me what you like. What do you don't like? And like, she just takes like a poll and comes up with it, and but again, I think in 1960 talking about those things, we just didn't do that. We couldn't talk about that kind of stuff. So, and it was easy to pin it all on Norman, who we only learn what his real psychosis is in the very end of the movie. Whereas this guy's like, we get it the whole way. Which is, what I find interesting is that there was no mention of like what happened to the father, like that. I was like, I expected some side bit about like he died under mysterious circumstance or whatever. And like you find out later Mark killed him or whatever. I mean, you wonder like what happened to that dude. But...
Well, it's that banality of evil, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like how many people inflict harm on their children,
right,
to various degrees, and I mean nothing happens. Like their kids just grow up saddled with these childhood traumas that then they're like trying to sort out as adults. And I think, I mean, everything you guys said is all the reasons I think that contribute to why Psycho has this long legacy and all of this acclaim and everybody's seen it and it's this pop culture touchstone, and Peeping Tom isn't. Definitely all of those aspects of the frankness of it, that the psychology is there from the start. And I think that it does feel more real, relatable, and we're in the POV of the killer. And he's sympathetic in a lot of regards. Like we see throughout that this is a hurt kid that grew up to be a disturbed adult, but at the core, he's a hurt child. And we've all known those children or been those children. So it touches on something that I think makes people uncomfortable. And Psycho has almost towards the end a campy aspect to it. And the tone is, I think, a little more serious. And people get a little like, uh-oh.
By the
I have to really sit with the way this feels.
Yeah, by the time Sam Loomis and Norman are going at each other in the hotel and he he figures it out and he hits him over the head and it's all just this mess. It's the wrap up of the TV show. Like it is kind of crazy. I mean, when Vera Miles turns that woman around in the seat, I mean, that's pretty freaky and woo, but it's also kind of cheesy. So, I mean, that's the funny part of it. But I think also the end of Psycho plays very much on like almost like the end of an action movie, like here's the big punch out moment, and this movie's much more, like we say, subtle and dark and
sure,
morose in a lot of ways, which is a hard thing to leave people with. The old adage, if the rock band leaves you on the sad song, that means they're starting to reflect and are getting worried. So you got to worry about them. They got to leave you on the hard song. So.
But it did have a big finale.
Oh no, totally,
yeah,
punchy finale. I mean, no one was falling backwards down the stairs, but
no, but you know what? Same idea though. When he stabs, it's the same kind of feel. No, I'm not saying it's not. It doesn't have energy to it. It's just a different energy, is what I mean.
Yeah,
it just plays different. So. Well, I think we're at the part of the podcast where it's time to give final thoughts and popcorn ratings for Peeping Tom. So, Carmelita, let's start with you.
I love this film. As I said, I think its boldness in 1960 has aged so well that we can watch this now. What is it, 64 years later? There's plenty of things that still resonate in a way that, not every film ages that way. It was so bold and before its time. I love it. I'm so happy to have had the chance to discover it in recent years. I wish I had had it as long as I've had Psycho. I saw Psycho as a teenager. But now that I have it in my life, I know that I'll watch it a million more times. And I'm so stoked that we're talking about it. And maybe this will be the impetus for more people to check it out who haven't seen it, because it's just an incredible film. I almost forgot my popcorn rating. I'm so love struck talking about Peeping Tom. Jumbo. It's the jumbo popcorn. Fresh.
The refillable?
Yes. Yeah. Warm. More popcorn. And butter. Just that really tasty, warm butter.
Put a straw down, get the layers.
Yes.
I'm so glad that I was introduced to this film. Thank you, Carmelita, for suggesting it. And same, I watched Psycho in high school as like part of drama class or something. It might not have been for that. It might have been in college, actually. I don't know. I watched it as a mid to late teen for the first time and loved it for everything that it was. I think I would have liked Peeping Tom too. I would 100% recommend this movie. I'm going to give it a large popcorn. I mean, it needs it. It deserves it with all the fixings, the butter, the salt. I think it's clearly influenced movies after that. It's been on a number of best movies lists, but it really is just a great movie. And Jay, I'm going to echo something you said earlier. It's like an hour and a half long, hour, 40 minutes long. It did not feel like it was that long. I didn't get bored at all. I normally, like, hour and a half is max for a thriller horror movie for me. Anything longer than that, I feel like is overkill. But even then, an hour and a half sometimes feels like 2.5 hours. And this one did not feel like that at all. So props to that. Sign of a good movie. There wasn't a whole lot of air in it. But yeah, highly recommend large popcorn.
I'm going to be right there in the big jug of popcorn club because, man, this movie was just fabulous. We've talked about the pacing. It moves very quickly. It doesn't feel rushed, but it doesn't slow down. It drips enough detail out about enough about the backstory about his growing up that it kind of hooks you, right? And it wants you to see what's on this next can of film. They pace the kills out wonderfully, so you get one in each act leading up to the big scene of the menacing of the mother, and then when everything goes completely haywire at the end, it feels well-deserved and well-earned, and it feels like a natural progression of this guy slowly losing the plot and getting more and more pulled into this fixation to kill that he just can't avoid. This fixation, not necessarily to kill, but to record these moments of fear. Man, yeah. So it's just wonderful. I've had a great time with this movie. I'm definitely going to get other people to watch it. And it looks great. Even the version on Tubi, which doesn't always it gets whatever the closest to free version of a movie they can get. Mm-hmm. It's still a great looking transfer and very clean, beautiful colors. Just that wonderful lurid, that wonderful, like, almost artificial technicolor version of color that just, man, thing of beauty. This is not just movie theater popcorn. This is, you get the big pot out, you put it on the stove with a cup of oil, you throw the kernels in there, you pop the popcorn, you melt actual butter, maybe the good salted butter, and drizzle over the top. Just wonderful. Extra large popcorn.
Yeah, I'm so thrilled that we finally got to do this one because it's just been in the back of my head for years, and it was more of trying to find some excuse to do it or whatever. And when you mentioned it, Carmelita, and the way you messaged it to me, I was like, this is the perfect time, because this is the one, somebody I know that'll get it and really champions it. I had no idea how big this was for you. It's so cool to hear, but I knew that this would be something neat that I didn't know if Ron or Lindsey had seen it before. And I'm so glad that this is new for y'all, because it is one of those things. Once you see it, you're like, how did I miss this? It's like, oh gosh, it's just like, and those are fun because movies happen like that every now and then. Like one will come and go and you're like, oh, what happened? Well, I'll give you one that's always on the top lens of everything. Shawshank Redemption was a flop. It took TNT to get that in everybody's life, and just seeing it all again. Christmas Story didn't make a ton of money. It got replayed over and over. It became part of zeitgeist. This one doesn't get that necessarily, but I'm hoping as more and more people come around to it and learn about it, and even through our little channel here, if we can turn some people onto it, it's definitely worth a watch. If just for the technical aspect alone, it stands up, but the story is so rich. And look, I love Psycho. I think it's one of Hitchcock's best things. I think the block novel's pretty good. I think Tony Perkins is a friggin' star in that and is amazing, but it's not nearly as deep as this. I mean, I compare it to, okay, I'm going to do 80s wrestling references. Hold on. It's like Psycho's a Hulk Hogan match. I know exactly what I'm going to get. It's going to be the big cartoon, but Peeping Tom is Ricky Steamboat and Ric Flair going 2 out of 3 falls in a dark ass, venue in Baton Rouge, on a Thursday night. And it's all of that stuff, because it is so seminal. And again, I mean, we've sat here and named off probably 20 films that have taken something from this, that, or the other. And there's probably 500 more, that, because it was just so different. Nothing was made like this. There's not another comparable film. Only Psycho compares because of the subject matter, but they're not made the same. They don't look the same.
Right.
They don't have the same stuff. Even some of the cool Hitchcock stuff in that movie is nothing compared to what this is doing. So yeah, this is extra large popcorn. And again, I'm with you, Carmelita and Ron and Lindsey. I hope other people now go like, okay, I'm going to go give that a spin. I'm gonna give that a try. That's been sitting in the queue for years. Finally time to give it a watch and, have an opportunity to join in this discussion again with us and talk with others about it. Cause it's definitely one of those that's not just like horror film homework. This is a foundational piece of the whole thing, of everything we like now. And again, so much of what's being made now that's like considered good horror owes a lot to Peeping Tom. So Carmelita, we owe you a ton for bringing this to us. So thank you again for being here. Tell people where they can find all of the stuff that you're up to these days.
Oh, well, thank you for the opportunity. I love talking movies with you guys, and to be able to talk about this movie, just wonderful. So I've been podcasting a lot, and anytime I do, I post on Twitter about where I've been and where you can listen. So you can find me on Twitter and Letterboxd, kind of on Blue Sky. Same handle for everything, at Carmelita Says.
Absolutely. And I will do a slight plug here. If you haven't already done so, download the Film Feast episode with Carmelita and our friend Matt Bledsoe talking about Fight Club. It's one of the most fun discussions I've just got to bid. I'm sitting there going like, man, I'm just like getting my own popcorn out. That was a blast. So y'all are always
thank you.
A lot of fun to do that. So Ron, what do you got going on these days?
Just have a couple of features up on Den of Geek. Then the last couple of months. My favorite one is the one about Robert Shin, the guy who is the quote unquote cult leader of the 7M TikTok dance group. A bunch of people who went viral on TikTok for their dancing abilities. He has somehow managed to gather them all together and make them into a cult. But he has an interesting connection to the British royal family that also kind of ties back into this movie a little bit, in the sense that it's related. It's related to the movie industry. Both the Robert Shin movie that connects him to the British royal family and this movie are about kind of the background people in the movie industry. So that's a fun little thing. Check that out if you haven't. And also did a thing about an episode of Blumhouse Netflix's Worst Roommate Ever called The Lethal Landlord, where a bunch of kids also on TikTok. Carmelita's nodding her head with a big old smile on her face. It's this insane story about these kids who are like geocaching on a beach in Seattle, and they come across a suitcase full of severed body parts. And it kind of digs into the story of this guy who was the murderer, and how he basically, on the face of him, he was like a nice quiet Michael type, but he had a secret evil Michael-like back personality twist. So both of those were pretty fun stories, and also some stuff about House of the Dragon, and probably some more stuff by the time this comes out.
Absolutely. We'll always follow those things. Find it all linked in our show notes. Of course, you can follow this show on social media at Film Strip Pod, where we share announcements about upcoming shows, all kinds of other stuff. We'll occasionally subtweet stuff that, has an anniversary, because we've done a lot of movies that are hitting anniversaries, or 35, 38 years of this, that, and the other. We'll throw ours out there, or somebody will make a side comment about something. And, recently our friends Anthony and Matt were talking about the Ghostbusters 2016 movie. More people need to like it. And I was like, I just want the world to know Ron and I were in on that early. We loved that movie before anybody else did. And we recorded that sucker. It came out on Thursday night. We both watched it, recorded, and threw that episode out that night. So it's one of the fastest turnarounds in film strip history. But you can check that out along with all of our huge archive, almost 400 episodes. And to that point, we are sneaking up on episode 400, everyone. And we're planning some fun stuff for that one, but we're taking suggestions. What should be episode 400 for Film Strip? Drop us a mention in the socials. Let us know what you think. We'll pull it out eventually, and then we'll, of course, let you know when we get to 400, but we're not that far away. So coming up, very fun. And always bonus cool points if you leave us a positive review and share the show on your socials. We really appreciate it. So until next time, for Carmelita, Lindsey, and Ron, I'm Jay. Thank you for listening to Film Strip.
Thank you for listening to Film Strip. You can find more episodes on our website, filmstrippodcast.com. The Film Strip theme music is produced and performed by Frozen Lake 121. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.